Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Northumberland Coast Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty Virtual Annual Forum. I'm Patrick Norris. A bit of housekeeping before we start. Can you mute your microphones, please? And after each presentation, we got this afternoon. I've got an echo. There'll be questions. Presentation. My thanks to the AONB team who've helped put this together today. And the theme we have today, we chose today, is tranquility. One of the objectives of the AONB Management Plan is to maintain existing levels of tranquility and increase them where possible. And in order to gain an understanding of its meaning and value, we have asked our speakers to help us unravel some of the main issues surrounding the concept. So once Ian has finished his bit, we'll start with the presentations. I must, before I go any further, I must say thank you to Jessica Turner. Many of you will know Jessica, and this is her last forum. As you may know, she's moving on to pastures new quite soon. I've known Jessica quite a long time now. I've always enjoyed her company, her hard work, and her enduring input into the Northumberland Coast AONB. And good luck, Jessica. Far away, so we will see you around in Northumberland from time to time, I'm sure. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Ian, who is going to talk about the work of the partnership and the staff team over the past year and the coming 12 months. Ian, thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm going to share my screen now. Can somebody just let me know if this works? That would be useful. Has that worked? No.
Yes.
Does that work, Catherine? Hello? Catherine?
Yes, Ian, we can see it.
We can see it, but you might want to put it onto slideshow because we can see your notes.
Okay, that's what I was. There we go. Is that better?
Yes, that's it.
Okay, sorry about that. Technical issues as ever with these things. Welcome everybody, welcome to our annual forum. Thank you, Patrick, for that introduction. That's great. This is just a quick update from me on the work of the AONB partnership and the staff team over the last 12 months. So there's been some comings and goings, as Patrick's already said. Jessica is due to leave us soon, but before all that, there was a planning team restructure within the Northumberland County Council earlier this year, and David Feiger, who was doing this job for us last year, moved on and within the planning service still onwards and upwards to become a manager in the planning service at NCC. So I took over as the AONB manager from January. In June, lottery funding ended for our Coast Care initiative, and in July, Mark Fennell joined the team as the volunteering and access officer. He's picked up the Coast Care mantle and is leading that now. And just 3 weeks ago, Mark Middleton joined us as a nature recovery and farming advisory officer. My Photoshop skills aren't good enough to be able to put Mark into this photograph, unfortunately, but we've now got two marks in the team and are up to strength, but as I said, for not long. So very sad that Jessica's leaving us after 9 years with the AONB partnership, but we do wish her well in her new role. Hopefully we're going to have a quick recruitment into that role, but for a short time we are up to speed. So as you can see from this photograph on the left hand side, that's me, and then we have Sarah Windlow, who's our built and historic environment officer, Catherine Gray, communications and funding officer. As I've said, Mark Fennell, who leads on Coast Care, as the access and volunteering officer, and then Jessica Access Naden Project Officer and Built Environment Officer on the right. And then Mark is, honestly, he's just off that photograph, Mark Middleton. I mentioned Coast Care. So our Coast Care volunteering initiative project funded by the Heritage Lottery has been going on for the last 4 years. The Heritage Lottery funded period ended in June. We're obviously very grateful to them for their support. Our partnership with Northumberland Wildlife Trust and Sea Houses Development Trust to deliver that project came to an end. Obviously, we still work with them, but Coast Care now sits within the AONB partnership led by Mark. And as you can see, this infographic shows some of the achievements of the Coast Care project. 6,037 bags of litter. It's astounding. The legacy we have, as well as all of this work that's taken place, is a crack team of well-trained and enthusiastic volunteers. We've had a relatively smooth transition into the AONB partnership and into Northumberland County Council, and most of the volunteers have stuck with us, and more are joining the team. So our priorities for Coast Care for the next 12 months and beyond, obviously supporting the transition into under the auspices of Northumberland County Council under Mark's expert steerage, continuing the training and support that we've offered volunteers previously, recruiting new volunteers and a range of conservation tasks around the AONB. We've got path wardens now covering both the long distance routes in the AONB, the Coast Path and St Cuthbert's Way. And we have 3 parishes now have path wardens, and that's work that we're going to continue over the next 12 months. We're about to establish a community charitable incorporated organisation, which will help us to bring in funding to make Coast Care a more sustainable operation in the future, and that's just about to happen. So our other Heritage Lottery funded project is Bamborough Bones, Access Naden, to give it its real name. And this is a partnership with the PCC at St Aidan's Church in Bamborough and the Bamborough Heritage Trust, all expertly led by Jessica over the last couple of years. So this year, the crypt, together with the digital glossary and the church interpretation, we're only open for, before this year, we're only open for 4 months before COVID hit. So now we are, after 3 national lockdowns and various plans and tiers, the crypt has been fully open all summer, and we're keeping our fingers crossed that that remains the case. In the last year, digital outputs have been increased because the digital glossary and website weren't impacted by the lockdowns, and Jessica's managed to give lots of talks to local community groups. There's, just move that on too quickly there. There's been the Hazel Song events and even candlelit All Hallows Eve tours. So looking forward, Jessica assures me that the project publication is imminent. But before that, Max Adams and John Connell will give talks on the 13th of November. Tickets are on Eventbrite, I was told to plug that. And large-scale conference is planned for mid-June next year. As I said, none of this would have been possible without Jessica's drive and passion. I'm getting a lot of noise there. Can everyone make sure they're muted, please? None of this would have been possible without Jessica's drive and passion. And on behalf of the project partners, the BHT, St Aidan's PCC, I would like to formally thank Jessica for all of her work on Bamborough Bones, and it will be a wonderful legacy for her time with us here on the Northumberland coast. So thanks very much, Jessica. News elsewhere, particularly our built and historic environment work, conservation area character appraisals, which Sarah's been leading on, appraisal reviews, sorry, and these are for 6 of the 9 conservation areas in the AONB, Embleton, Sea Houses, North Sunderland, Lesbury, Almouth and Warkworth, and a character appraisal assessment is being drawn up for Holy Island. We've been working on our new design guide for the built environment in the AONB, and it's nearing completion, I'm pleased to say, at least to the draft stage, and we hope to have a final draft out for consultation at the turn of the year. It's been a long process. We've incorporated both our existing buildings guidance with our highways guidance into a single document for the built environment, but it'll be worthwhile. It's going to be a really, really useful tool for us in the future. We've brought in a consultant, Sarah Dyer, to bring the document together for us. And as I say, we're nearly there on that. Once it's formally adopted by the AONB partnership, we'll be able to undertake a range of training sessions with everyone from parish councils to architects, highways engineers to planners, whoever we can train, street lighting engineers, all sorts of people, to bring them up to speed on our latest thinking. A big deal for us this year has been the Farming in Protected Landscapes programme. So announced by DEFRA just 12 months ago, it was finally launched in July. And here's Harry Baker Cresswell at David Park's farm at Buston when we appeared on the BBC News talking about the opportunities for the programme and what it could bring for farmers. This scheme offers funding to farmers and land managers right through until 2024 in all of the English protected landscapes. And that's to support nature recovery, mitigate the impacts of climate change, provide opportunities for people to discover, enjoy and understand the landscape and its cultural heritage, support nature-friendly, sustainable farm businesses. So if you're a farmer and you're interested in funding, then do get in touch with Mark Middleton via the website. And next year, hopefully this time next year, we'll be able to tell you about some of the exciting projects that we've been able to fund. When the period of lockdown ended last year, lots of people headed for national parks and AONBs right across the country, and unsurprisingly, that was the same here. It was brilliant to see people coming back out after a horrendous time, enjoying the countryside, enjoying the protected landscapes for the first time, and supporting the businesses whenever they could. Obviously, this great number of people coming to enjoy the AONB did come at a cost and created tensions in some of the local communities and certainly impacted on the natural environment of the AONB. So in 2021, we were much better prepared. We had a plan in place to be better prepared for this. A coastal summit was held with parish councils last winter, and that brought forward many of the issues. And as I say, a plan was put in place to deal with those. Northumberland County Council brought together a tactical group to manage visitor pressure. This group met every Thursday lunchtime, to plan for the week ahead. And for the first time, it brought together the police, the fire service, the Coast Guard, various council departments, and ourselves. And from that came big things like the Love It Like It's Yours campaign, which was on TV and in newspapers, all sorts of outlets. It featured Patrick, our chairman, as its poster boy, and it seemed to be very, very successful. Variable messaging signs on highways you'll have seen, to small things like getting traffic cones out for farmers at harvest time to help them get to and from their fields, all help to make sure that in 2021 we cope much better with the huge numbers of people who visited the coast than we did the previous year. We responded to 240 planning applications over the last 12 months, which is an awful lot of development in the AONB, and probably close to 3/4 of those were related to tourism. Obviously, this takes up a lot of staff time for a very small team. Sarah leads on this, but it does take up a huge amount of our time. We're currently working with Northumberland Tourism, Northumberland's destination management organisation, on the destination management plan. The plan has to ensure that we have a thriving tourism industry here on the coast that protects the special qualities of the AONB and delivers benefits of tourism to the whole community. The management plan, the AONB management plan, sets out a model for tourism, and we very much hope that the new destination management plan helps us to achieve that model. It has to. Our nature recovery plan is underway. Mark Middleton's leading on that. This came about as a result of the AONB conference in Colchester in 2019, where AONB signed the Colchester Declaration and agreed to produce a nature recovery plan for each AONB. We also pledged to do our bit collectively to try and get vulnerable species like this purple milk vetch off the endangered list. We've highlighted 9 vulnerable species or endangered species in the AONB where we think we can make a difference. Birds like this ring plover that nest on the beach, or the roseate tern, currently only breeds on Coconut Island, are some of the examples of our champion species. We'll have to have the nature recovery plan in place for these species soon, and a nature recovery plan for the whole of the AONB before we review the AONB Management Plan in 2023. So plenty of work there for us to be getting on with. So finally, looking ahead to the coming year, like Northumberland County Council, the AONB Partnership has declared a climate emergency, and we'll be working towards net zero by 2030. This is a big challenge, obviously. Some of the things that we can be doing that we've looked at and will take forward. For instance, we'll be looking at natural ways of sequestering more carbon through habitat creation, for example, working with communities to cut emissions and minimise waste, or with the Destination Management Plan to decarbonise tourism and look at transport in the AONB. We've listened to local people who've told us about the impact of cars and car parking on their communities. We're currently looking at 90%, well over 90% of our visitors who arrive by car. And whilst we have got a very good bus service, it could be even better. We need to have a plan to get people out of their cars. We can't just keep building more car parks. It's unsustainable, and it's even more unsustainable to build those in an uncoordinated way. So we need a plan. We can't tackle parking and transport independently, so we're seeking funding for strategic review of parking and transport for the AONB, and we'll be looking to see how we can fund that over the next month or so. Finally, we're scoping out a large landscape scale project in the south of the AONB, focusing around the Allen and Coquet estuary areas, but probably up to Long Houghton. Broad range of projects within that, looking at nature recovery, habitat improvement, understanding more about our historic environment, better access to the countryside, but more importantly, to connect people in that area with the landscape that's on their doorstep, both physically and virtually. So that's my little update. As our theme today is tranquility, I thought I'll end up my update with a nice tranquil scene at the mouth of the Howick Burn. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Patrick, our chair, the AONB Partnership, and particularly my excellent team for all the support they've given me over the last 10 months in this new role for me. It's been a challenging opportunity. I'm mostly enjoying it, mostly enjoying that challenge. I hope that you all enjoy the forum. And before I pass back to Patrick, does anybody have any questions for me or for the staff team? That should have ended now. Have I come back to the room now? Oh, good.
Thanks, Ian. Such a lot going on. And our thanks from the partnership to all the hard work of the AONB team over the year. We look forward to 2022. Next, we're going to start with our speakers, but I omitted to thank Councillor John Woodman for his very proud to be chair and carrying on all the good work that you started, and we will continue to do that. Tranquility is interesting. I've been reminded about tranquility this year. Those who know me will know I spend a lot of my time taking people out on guided walks in Northumberland, and quite a few times in this year people have cried. We've had happy tears, and whether that's the tranquility, the space, the relief, I don't know, but I do think that tranquility has got something to do with that. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing what our speakers have to say this afternoon. And I'd like to introduce Professor Denise Hewlett. And Denise is a senior fellow for knowledge exchange and the principal investigator of the Economic and Social Research Council's Broadly Engaging with Tranquility project. I hope I got that right, Denise. And without further ado, I'll hand over to you, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you. Yeah, I've sort of scooted along. It's Tranquility and the research my team do has got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So let me explain. Well, firstly, hello everybody. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much, Catherine, Patrick, and also Ian and Sarah and Jessica for allowing me to come today and talk about Tranquility. It's quite clear from the whistle-stop tour of presentation that Ian did for us that Northumberland coast is in abundance of tranquil spaces, it would appear, but also much like we are down in the south, also under increasing visitor pressure, which has obviously an impact potentially on tranquility. And in preparation for today, I was thinking with all this COP26 stuff going on, you know, just how meaningful is tranquility in a protected area? Well, just by way of introducing this, if I may, I work a lot at international levels now with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And also I'm a trustee of the AONBs in England. And so much of what we do conserving these beautiful spaces, as well as providing for quiet time, obviously for people to visit our AONBs or our national parks, has everything to do with tranquility. And in fact, there is a common assumption that the more tranquil a space is, the more likely that particular space might be conserved for not only our own health and well-being by visiting that space, taking time out, but also for the species in that particular space. So tranquility and the notion of health, both environmental health and of people's health, are very, very closely linked. I mentioned earlier, tranquility is just one aspect of our team's research. And as I've seen in your own management plan, the importance of tranquility in these spaces is highlighted quite strongly. I think it's section 4, isn't it, in the AONB's management plan for Northumberland Coast. And what we do is map what that tranquility might look like. So I'm just going to share my screen, if I may now. Let's make sure this works. If I could have somebody just say a yay that you can see my screen. Lovely, Patrick, I can see you nodding. So this slide, I'm sure, is familiar to many people in this room. This is taken from your own Facebook page website, a photograph of part of the Northumberland coast. And clearly there's a lot of factors here that one might attribute to tranquility. We're talking about very open space. We're talking about heritage in the background. Very few people. I think there's only 2 people that one can see. There's the notion of water that people often identify with a tranquil space. And anything in terms of modern man-made infrastructure, I think there is only here a bench and potentially a bin just the other side maybe, or a gate. I can't quite discern it. But these factors most commonly come up on a pretty regular basis when people think about a particular tranquil space. Sorry, I'm trying to move this along. Conversely, this photograph here shows one of our spaces down here in the south on the Dorset coastline. This is actually a footpath leading on down to Durdle Door. And this was taken just this summer. As yourselves up there, we've seen an exponential growth in visitors during the pandemic. Last calculation my team did was a 500% growth in visitor numbers in comparison with previous years. What was particularly interesting, if we just take from a tranquility perspective, was how these visitors perceived tranquility compared to others. We started doing tranquility studies back in 2013, and part of the area that we conducted tranquility in was this particular space. Given what I said to you about 500% growth, the original people that were involved in that original research would have been horrified at this number of people. One of the big factors that contributes to tranquility is seeing very few people, hearing very few noises other than natural noises, birdsong and the like. This year, we introduced to another study we're doing the notion of tranquility for these visitors. We were fascinated. These visitors considered this area to be particularly tranquil. Well, of course, many of them were coming from key cities, metropole spaces, where for them being out in the open, green space, this vast horizon going out into the sea, the ability for fresh air, etc., all contributed to what they felt was tranquility. And indeed, this is the top end of the cliff that you've just seen. Again, this was highly rated by such people as a photograph we took back in 2013 and admittedly a different area, but pretty much adjacent to where we were in the summer. This was considered tranquil by people pre-pandemic. So what are the key factors? Well, many of these I've seen from your management plan are already listed, the characteristics of what people consider to be tranquil or non-tranquil. Firstly, taking tranquility, the majority of studies conducted since the early noughties right up to the present time seem to be fairly consistent to varying degrees, but there does seem to be a priority given to what people can see, then what people can hear, how they experience the space, and unquestionably anything to do with the natural environment. In priority order, water, trees, natural woodland, and the openness of a space are the number one factors that they describe a tranquil space within. And of course, cultural heritage, by that meaning certain characteristics of what they expect to see in a space. So, for example, in Dorset, thatched cottages, Corfe Castle, all these historical stuff that so often is referred to in marketing literature, figures in what people consider to be a tranquil space. Non-tranquility, first and foremost, anything modern that is man-made. And the number one public enemy, which was quite interesting, Ian, when I heard you mentioning earlier about going carbon neutral and whether or not more car parks would or not be established in your AONB, the number one enemy was always traffic. Didn't matter what area we've gone to. Interestingly, even in Dorset this summer when we reran another tranquility study in the area, yet again, traffic was the number one hated thing about tourism in the area, even though, of course, as tourists, we're part and parcel of the problem. Second to that was any type of infrastructure. So primarily things that people particularly dislike, mobile phone masts, particularly if they are pretending to be a tree. People found that way past gone humorous. And the other factor that was quite interesting was wind turbines, sorry. And that was quite generational. So the older somebody was, male or female, or the younger somebody was, would almost correlate with their view of whether or not infrastructure would or would not be non-tranquil, with younger people finding wind turbines quite tranquil, actually. Conversely, the older somebody was, and I have to say out there, chaps, the more for men, these particularly figured as particularly non-tranquil factors in a space. Other people, children particularly, poor behaviour, what was considered to be poor behaviour, especially related to the tourism season, was considered to disrupt residents' experience of tranquility in a space. And also the threat, safety. The safety factor of a space, particularly near cliffs and coastlines, was depicted by participants as being non-tranquil. all factors that in the Northumberland coast area we can sure relate to. Our research, if I move on to that now, was based on the original Campaign for Protection of Rural England studies, CPRE studies, starting back in the early noughties. Many who are in the room today may actually recognise this particular map. It was well publicised nationally on websites, social media at that time, and also in the press, even on TV, I believe. And it was based on the idea that anything red was depicting least tranquil or a non-tranquil space, and anything particularly green would be a tranquil space. And there was varying levels of green and varying levels of red according to how tranquil or non-tranquil people felt a space was. There were many advantages of this study. I have to say it was really cutting edge at the time. It was built on the notion of the late 90s, where just expert views were, 4 or 5 people in a room with planners and indeed other specialists of highways planning were in a room, and they determined what might or might not be a tranquil space dependent on what you could hear. And as I've already said to you earlier, sight is a really important factor for how people experience positively tranquility. So those early studies didn't consider sight, but they did consider how something could be heard. And those studies very much came from motorway planning and how far away from a motorway that noise could be heard. But the CPRE studies went much, much further. Firstly, they connected the notion of tranquility to people's health, special qualities of protected landscapes, like AONBs, like national parks across the UK. As I've just said, they built on approaches of expert opinion by a public consultation. It was a very academic study, so it was what we call valid, robust and rigorous study. Which was based on focus groups and also the use of geographical information systems software, GIS, to create those maps from the views they collated from people involved in the study. At that time, the maps were hugely progressive, but they were only on resolution of 500 meters, at best 250 meter resolutions. What does that mean? It's all about how nuanced the map could be, picking up particular factors in a space that might impact on tranquility or not. So we built on that study, in partly based by the critique that came from the CPRE studies. One of the big critiques was the resolution in the maps needed to be increased. It was also felt that a far broader public consultation was needed. There also needed to be seen, understandably, I would suggest, how tranquility maps might be used, how the information might be useful, which is actually easier said than done, because it can be quite a political context that tranquility studies are built up within. And also there were questions about how the CPRE studies not only can be improved, but how, looking forward into the future, the tranquility studies coming from then, much like my own team's research, might be built upon to see over periods of time, 5, 10, 15, 20 years into the future, how they may change dependent on development, dependent on the increase in visitor numbers, for example. So we actually, partly through technological process of GIS, managed to get the resolution down to 5 meters squared. So our maps are particularly nuanced. At worst 100 meters squared. We found 5 meters was almost too nuanced. So the partnership organisations we work with, such as councils, authorities, wildlife trusts, community group organisations and AONBs, asked us to increase the resolution a little, and a bit like a volume button, we turned the maps up so as they could make more use of them, which I'll show you shortly how they've used the studies. We included in the research not just managing authorities, councils, AONB partnerships, etc., but also visitors. So the tourists, how did they experience tranquility in the space? And then we also included residents living within the areas of outstanding natural beauty we work within, and also on the borders, including the so-called hard to reach. In other words, the people that would not normally be involved in any surveys. They choose not to get involved for whatever reason. The end result of our very first study was we got nearly 22,000 views on how people felt they experienced either tranquility or non-tranquility, purely in the area of Dorset, this first study. And there's been lots of impactful activities since, regular evaluations of tranquility, and we've extended our studies not just throughout England, but we've even taken the study now to Spain. How did we get those views? Oh, I beg your pardon, let me just go back. How did we get those views? We ran a number of different research stages. The first was different focus groups. We had a group for representatives from authorities. We had a focus group with local residents and also with visitors. We also had a household survey, which was randomised, so it couldn't be seen as biased in any way. We did a number of on-site surveys in all of the tourism hotspots within the Dorset area of outstanding natural beauty. And then, of course, we had to bring all those views together, which we call qualitative and quantitative. So some of the stuff was descriptions, sentences, where people felt more able to describe what a tranquil space might look like. And other parts of the surveys were what we call more statistically oriented. So we gave people options and tick boxes to decide and determine as close as possible what they considered was tranquility in that area. We then had to collect topographical details, geographical data sets from the local council, primarily actually, the county council, but also from DEFRA and from EDINA, which is a data set that us educational institutions have access to. And those data sets were all about vegetation, landscape character assessments, street lighting, data on the road network, also sorry, I'm trying to remember the word now, the level above seawater to be able to get elevation of the land in the particular space. And all of that data was processed through a GIS system, a geographical information system. And the result were maps like this. These two maps, we decided, or our partners, the Dorset area of outstanding natural beauty, wanted to see how different groups experience tranquility in this is particularly the Purbeck area in Dorset. So we had a map for residents, we had a map for organisations, the county council, wildlife trusts, etc. And these two maps, the red, remember, is non-tranquility and the green is tranquility. I think you can see from here that residents, householders in this area saw a lot more non-tranquility in the Purbecks than was considered by the organisations to exist in that particular area. Conversely, there was a lot more tranquility considered to be experienced, you see in this north and south area on the right map, than residents were reporting. Interestingly, by the way, this little green area here is a Ministry of Defence space. It's their rifle range in the Purbecks in the village of Lulworth. And this area up here in the north, even though opposite here is Bournemouth, so you've got all the sky glow coming in from Bournemouth, This area is much quieter than the rest of Purbeck's, and in fact there's a lovely nature reserve or several nature reserve spaces along here and heathlands. These next two maps, the one on the left is residents and the one on the right is tourists. And interesting, just by eyeballing it, if you would, at this moment in time, you can see the views on how tranquil or otherwise these particular spaces are fairly similar. Although I would suggest that with residents, the extension of non-tranquility even cuts across what the previous map showed with organisations as being more green, the residents perceiving quite a spread of non-tranquility throughout the Purbeck's, particularly in this area here. This is Wareham. But where the tourists are concerned, although there is some similarity, there's a lot less non-tranquility shown on the right-hand map by tourists. But what is extremely evident, I don't know if you can see my cursor, I'm moving it down the right-hand map, these quite linear patterns, I wonder if you can guess what they are. Yes, if it's crossed your mind, they are the road network, the key road network. And that's obviously particularly verifying what the tourists had told us before. The number one enemy for them was traffic, even though they are part and parcel of the problem. Now, this is all great, fine and dandy, you may be thinking. Denise, they look like great maps. Sounds like an awful lot of work went into that with a team of, there was only, in fact, 9 of us and another 10 officers from the county council. We worked in a partnership with them. How have we used these studies? These are just some of the key ways that the data we've produced from our studies right back in 2013 up to even this last year, how they've been used by the authorities. Now, for the Dorset AONB, any staff training has to go through the data that we've collated on tranquility. The information we most recently provided has supported discussions in the Dorset State of Environment report. Sorry, I'm getting feedback. I suspect there's a mic on. It's all, the information has also been used in planning consultations and in planning appeals, waste mineral strategy, dark skies strategy, even in terms of impact management of tourism and visitors. Obviously, it's informed marketing structure and even identified where cycling routes and installations might go or might not be able to go. So it's provided the officers in that particular area with information to be able to draw down upon funding and also work with other departments at county level to make decisions on what will or not be done so as to avoid impinging conservation projects and at the same time enhance what they do for tourists. So there's a number of ways they can be used, but they do come with a bit of a caveat, tranquility studies. I noticed that one of the aspirations at Northumberland Coast is to do a tranquility mapping exercise, which I'd be happy to answer any questions afterwards, Ian, if you had any. The original studies were expensive. Our first one cost the best part of £250,000, took 2 years. It needs extensive skills in GIS as well as research methods. And so that thought process led us to design initially in QGIS, which is a free, openly accessible, available GIS system. That's still a work in progress. But now in ArcGIS, we have automated what we originally did. It takes approximately 2 months. It costs an awful lot less to be able to progress. And it still draws upon public engagement, public consultation, and it still recognises that tranquility is a very subjective, but can be highly tangible product that can really support what the protected area authorities do and help them implement their own management plans. Give you an idea of outputs, now we've automated it. On the left, you'll see a map that the original very expensive studies produced. And on the right, the bottom box in the corner, the same results, slightly different colours, slightly more pixeling on the right-hand side than on the left, but very similar results. If you do decide to go through a Tranquility project, or anybody that might consider this, there's a number of questions you have to ask yourself. How do you actually determine Tranquility? Do you just want it to be a few in a team making the decision based on previous research, or do you want to involve the public? And if so, who in the public, how, when? Because something that may well cross people's mind, depending on the season as well, might have an impact on how people experience Tranquility, for example. And of course, the most practical point, what geographical data sets do you have? What's the quality of those data sets? Tranquility maps do have to rely on secondary data sets, like highways, like vegetation, landscape character assessments, etc., etc. And if the quality is not there, then it's the old adage, isn't it, with digital technologies, garbage in, garbage out. You'd have loads of caveats, but everything can be got round. That's it on Tranquility. I'm not sure whether I've overrun or not. If I have, my apologies. If there are any questions, please do feel free to contact me at this email address. My Winchester email address will be easier than find me with the IUCN. And that's it. And there's also my mobile number. I think these slides are being shared maybe after this presentation. And I'll come back to you all now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Denise. That was an excellent insight into the technical aspects of mapping Tranquility. And I do recall that the CPRE study from the early part of the century, and yeah, that was useful. I think the most tranquil place they discovered in England was in Northumberland, actually, in the College Valley. But
yes, it was.
Yeah,
yes.
It was a place I love and visit often. So thank you for that. If any questions for Denise, could you pop them in the chat, please? And we'll have 2 or 3 questions. Anything come through, Sarah, particularly?
No, nothing's come through as yet, but
okay. Well, we'll move quickly on then. Thanks, Denise.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Henna Assikainen. Henna is a Finnish artist based in the UK, and her practice explores humans' complex relationships with nature and its intersections with social justice, climate justice, migration, and notions of belonging. And I rather hope we can share in the forum backup the video that Henna produced on the Pilgrim's Way to the Holy Land of Lindisfarne, which I found quite inspiring. So if I can hand over to Henna, please, and we'll hear your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. We had quite a bit of trouble today to get my slides sorted. Is it Sarah or Jessica who is sharing the screen? If you could go to the very first slide, they are not. You are not in the very first one yet. You are in the second one.
Oh, okay, Henna.
That's it. Great.
Oh.
Yeah, and
Is that right?
That's great. That's perfect. And I just want to say also that I'm not actually going to show the video today. So I would, if you would like to find it yourself later on from the YouTube channel, research between two shores, Henna Assikainen, and you will find it from there. It's sometimes a bit difficult to share videos with the online presentation. They don't run always very smoothly. So I decided just to keep this as a PowerPoint presentation. But thank you. So it is a real pleasure. Oh, another thing. Shall we show that when I show this, you will go to the next photo. When I show my thumb up, okay? So sorry about this mayhem here at the beginning. So thank you. It is a real pleasure to be presenting my work today as part of Northumberland Coast AONB Annual Forum. It is particularly so as Between Two Shores would not have happened without you. Your support was crucial securing the Arts Council funding for the project, so thank you. I would like to introduce my project by giving a brief presentation of my previous practice to set Between Two Shores in context. I will talk about a couple of examples, Forage and Delicate Subtle, which share similar methodology to Between Two Shores. Before I start, I would like to give a credit to where credit is due. I would like to mention some of the amazing, talented, creative people that support the work. The participatory nature of what I do means that so much is dependent on others, not just those who document the work, such as Arto Polus, Sharon Bailey, Simon Rudolphi, Jill Tate, and Janina Sapaliuskaite, whose photography you will see in this presentation, but also those who participate as refugees and asylum seekers, generous and courageous despite the precarity of their position. Next slide, please. A lot of my work explores questions surrounding the idea of belonging and our complex relationship with the world. It does this through a base in a combination of ecological and social issues, and is made with the participation of different members of the community, and particularly with people who have a lived experience of migration and displacement. Working and walking together, we make communal experiences within rural landscapes and use these to explore issues such as inequalities in access to nature and green spaces, our different experiences of migration, what it takes to develop a sense of belonging, to feel at home, and our intricate relationship with nature. The idea of hostile environment was introduced to deter desperate people from seeking asylum, but it seems now that idea has been extended, the hostility to the environment. Despite the rhetoric which Greta Thunberg perfectly characterizes as the blah, 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 our natural environment is subject to increasingly hostile policies that have taken us to the point that there is now genuine scientific, social and political concern for the continued habitability of the planet in the face of the possibly permanent damage that our current economic system is causing to both our own and the habitats of all other living things. The realization of the ways in which seemingly different things, places and people are in fact interdependent, intertwined and connected is central to my practice. Everything that we do, each action, each decision generates a cascade of consequences, and these directly impact on who can live where. Climate change, colonialism, extractivism, competition for resources, all inevitably lead to the movement of people, and the focus of my practice has become centered on engaging with people who have this experience of displacement, who are having to find new places to live, establishing new homes. It is increasingly clear that how we live, our economic, political and social activity is all part of the ecological continuum. But how, in often the most difficult of circumstances, do we make a new home? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Great. When I first undertook my own migration to the northeast of England, it was the discovery of the nature and landscape that surrounded my new home city that helped me to put down roots and to begin to feel like I belonged, to feel at home. In my experience, the landscape and the nature they host provides a psychological, emotional link between a country of origin and an adopted country, even when they present very different characteristics. Belonging is grounded in engagement and understanding. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the starting point for this project has been about creating a sense of belonging through the provision of access to the natural environment, to the beautiful countryside, which we have in abundance in the northeast of England. And then the next one. Often, people who have been displaced from their home communities find themselves confined physically and economically to an unknown and sometimes unfriendly cityscape with no ready means to access the rich, natural and cultural environments of their locality, something which then limits their opportunities to establish a common understanding of a place from which, within an engagement with the resident community, can emerge. Next one. These projects have sought to begin those engagements, those dialogues, those experiences that attach us to a place we can call home. They don't pretend to resolve the problems that many of the participants have, but they do offer a place where a life beyond those issues might begin to be imagined. So together we have explored various sites, cultural, heritage and nature reserves. We have walked in rural countryside, forests and meadows. Next one. This image here is from the Forage project, which I mentioned earlier. The project involved visits to 3 different National Trust properties in the Northeast and exploring how these spaces position us and tell a particular historical narrative. Here we are visiting Seaton Delaval Hall, which is one of the many properties mentioned in the report on the connections between colonialism and the properties now in care of National Trust. This report has generated a lot of debate about the role of the National Trust and how we address the complex and often troubling histories that attach to some of the properties they manage. It has become a central plank in the government's so-called culture war, as they seek to distract from the rather obvious failings and shift the blame for those who have not been in power for the last 11 years. Some fraction of the political establishment do not like being reminded of the racist and inhuman practices that established them. The climate crisis and social inequalities are all symptoms of the world shaped by colonialism and then by capitalism, both of them ways of organizing society that values the comfort of one group over the lives of others. The Forage project took place before any of this controversy emerged. However, it felt incredibly meaningful to visit these places with our diverse group and to think about what was being presented to us, how these spaces position us, which history is being told and which is not, and what that tells us about our present and its own obsessive nostalgia for that which never was. Next slide, please. Forage culminated with a celebratory installation made with gathered materials from the walks in the park in the west end of Newcastle. Here are a few images of the installation. The installations included evolving drawings made with these forage materials. Someone started something and others continued. Next one. There was this rather wonderful acorn woman, which took on different shapes throughout the day. And then the next image. This girl was making some kind of map with villages, connecting roads and dwellings. Next one, please. And we made garlands of the forage botanical matter. And then another garland. This boy's fern garland was rather spectacular. Since this project, the term foraging has become something which for me captures the essence of all of the walking project we have done together. Foraging in the broadest possible sense, foraging for belonging, foraging for experiences, for memories and for friendships. Next slide, please. This is an installation called Delicate Shuttle. It was made to extend the practice and conversation to other contexts. Delicate Shuttle was an installation that explored the idea that all life and environments are interdependent and interconnected. The foraging walks leading to this work were structured around the habitats of a species of a tree called white poplar, which became for us a potent botanical emblem. Next one, please. The title of the piece is a reference to the work of French philosopher Bruno Latour, who thinks that the world tends to deal with its problems in silos and does not consider the bigger picture and critically the interdependence of all things. The delicate subtle is his metaphor for this weaving together, and how, like any fabric, the social fabric depends on all these interwoven elements, its warp and weft. Next slide, please. The ecological and climate crisis, the pandemic, the uncertain future which we have faced, for many of us has caused a deep shift in our awareness, illuminating further the close relationships, the high levels of connectivity that exist between the various ecosystems and human activity. It is increasingly clear that how we live, our economic, political and social activity is all part of the ecological continuum and determines how others might live. Next slide, please. I chose the white poplar as the botanical embodiment of the work of the shuttle because it is itself a python, originating in Central Asia and making the journey to Britain over thousands of years until it has become a commonplace and familiar part of our landscape. It brings transformation and difference and beauty to this corner of the world, like all migrants do. The white poplar is also one of these plants that form a part of wider debate among biologists trying to determine when something stops being alien and becomes native. In broader conceptual terms, the native plants and animals, which partly define landscapes, are often integral to national identities. Alien species are sometimes presented not simply as unwanted ecological and economic pests, but as profound existential threat. Next one, please. In this context, attempts to exclude or eliminate aliens in order to protect native species implicate conservation within discourses around national identity, border definition and xenophobia. Many biologists think that there are better, more useful ways to categorize than alien versus native terminology. The work of the shuttle that Latour evokes shows how the strength of a community, ecological or social, depends on the threats, the relationships drawn between its elements, and contains within it an embodiment of hope for the future, and as such acts as a bridge to the Between Two Shores project. Next one, please. Between Two Shores is very much a bridge, a place of transit between departure and destination, of drawing together separate but intimately linked elements to form a new whole. Conducting any art project during a pandemic is going to be challenging, but undertaking a participatory project without being able to access and to engage with potential participants creates its own very particular kind of challenge, in effect stranding its development, and therefore Between Two Shores is still very much work in progress. But progress is being made and the first tentative steps have been made. Between Two Shores is a participatory art project which examines the intertwined issues of climate change, climate injustice, and especially climate-induced migration. Next one, please. Although global warming and its impact is largely recognized as the defining crisis of our time and the biggest threat to humanity, from a legal and policy perspective, climate refugees simply don't exist. There is currently no coherent global plan to address the catastrophic impact that sea level rise will have on those who inhabit the low-lying lands and who will consequently be displaced, who will be forced to try to establish new homes and livings. These people have no voice in the discussion and no place in the thinking of the powerful and the indifferent. But the sea level rise will also impact the global north, although to a lesser extent there will be consequences, and the displacement of communities will become something that even here in the UK will need to be addressed. So Between Two Shores seeks to draw attention to these issues by being grounded in the local, familiar, much loved and important environment, an environment profoundly threatened by the consequences of climate change. Next one, please. Lindisfarne, also known as Holy Island, is a tidal island, and its connecting causeway is particularly vulnerable to sea level rise, and over the coming decades, the island might become permanently cut off from the mainland. The ancient causeway path is likely to disappear, and parts of the island submerged. Lindisfarne is also an iconic, ancient and sacred site, and an ecologically important habitat. It is a place of migration and movement, refuge and a sanctuary for many migratory birds. There could not have been a more pertinent location for this project. Next one, please. This beautiful image was taken on a day when, as part of the project, we walked as climate activists, refugees, asylum seekers, scientists, photographers, and writers along the tidal path across the seabed to Holy Island to express our solidarity with all those seeking refuge and to draw attention to climate injustice and the impact of climate change taking place on our doorstep. We walked across the Pilgrim's Causeway to meet the island residents. We shared food, chatted about nothing and everything, experienced the elements, wind, mud, water, and reflected on the idea of sanctuary, hospitality, and welcome. Our walk was filled with laughter and happiness, prompting someone to wonder if a more somber mood might have been more appropriate in relation to the difficult and complex issues we were trying to draw attention to. Maybe so, but it was also important for me that the day would be a positive one. After all, as Rebecca Solnit says, joy doesn't betray but sustains activism, and when you face a politics that aspires to make you fearful, alienated, and isolated, joy is a fine initial act of insurrection. I think this also captures something of the nature of participatory art practice. The joy of making something together, the energy of the event, the interaction between peoples, cultures, histories, ideas, and hopes is something that sustains, is an indispensable part of this kind of participatory practice. Next one, please. I wanted us to have a positive day, and I did everything in my power to make it a pleasant experience. Though the weather is something I don't have much control over, the causeway can be merciless when it is windy and raining, and I must admit I was worried until the very moment we made landfall at Lindisfarne Nature Reserve. But we were lucky. The weather was in our favor. In fact, the day was gorgeous. Next one, please. So, with laughter, we waded through the shallow water, silky sand and muddy parts, exhilarated by the elements, by each other's company, and our wonder at walking on a seabed, on ground which is completely covered twice a day. Although the walk was a brief moment on a long journey of this project, it felt charged with significance and the beginning of an important dialogue. Next one, please. The next phase is working with the footage we captured on a day of the walk and making it into a basis for an installation. Alongside, this is the development of a climate migration testimonies archive, which will consist of short testimonies from people whose lives have been affected by climate change, as well as Lindisfarne residents' reflection on the changes that have taken place to the tidal landscape over their lifetimes. We are also planning with Sarah Taylor, who is the climate change adaptation specialist at Natural England, other meaningful ways to extend the project. Next one, please. By linking the local environment with the physical impact of climate change and the related issue of population displacement, the project draws attention in a more direct way to the difficult social effects climate change brings with it, to raise the voice of those affected and situate calls for action while reminding us of our personal and political responsibilities in relation to the global climate emergency. The link between migration and climate change is incredibly important and something that people seem uncomfortable or unable to address. If we are serious about tackling climate change, we have to see climate justice, migrant justice, and racial justice as inextricably interlinked with it. The disappearing Pilgrim's Way and the refuge towers that mark the path stand as a powerful metaphor for our time. We are living in an age of climate emergency, but also of pandemic and mass migration, of increasing social inequality and conflict, all of which are exacerbated by climate change, and we need to act on this. If we don't, we will all need a refuge tower to escape to. In my own small way, I have sought to find a means by which the consequences of these events might be addressed, to find ways in which we can step around the hostility and embrace hospitality, necessity, and belonging. It seems to me that one of the most important things we can do in the current situation is to create with conscience, to make ourselves feel at home again, to make everyone welcome. Thank you. That was me now.
Thank you, Henna. And yeah, despite the glitches in the IT, that was a wonderful presentation. And thank you very much. If you have questions or comments for Henna, please drop them in the chat. We'll try and pick up on them a bit later in the forum. But times are pressing. I think we're going to overrun. So if everybody's happy with that, we'll move on to the next speaker, and that is Madeleine Gohan. Madeleine is the planning officer for the campaign and policy team at the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England, responsible for local planning support. So Madeleine, can we go to your presentation, please?
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'll share my presentation now. You shouldn't be seeing my note. I think if I do this and then okay, can you see only my slides? Okay, great. So hello everyone, thanks for having me today. I'm the planning officer at National CPRE, so I live down in London. And today I'll be telling you a bit more about CPRE's work on Tranquillity, and more specifically about the method that we developed over time to try and map people's experience of Tranquillity. After that, I'll also quickly talk about the policy applications of this work, and then I'll finish off with some reflections on some of the work that remains to be done, as well as some of the redesign opportunities for any potential update of this mapping work. Quite a few of these have already been covered by Denise's great presentation. We are CPRE, the countryside charity, that's a new name. We were set up in 1926 with the aim of ensuring that everyone could access and enjoy the countryside. We're a national charity with about 30,000 members, and we have a local CPRE group in every county. Why do we care about Tranquillity? Because it directly relates to our core mission, which is to promote, enhance, and protect the thriving countryside. Tranquillity is a key indicator of countryside quality. It's also important to people's experience of the countryside, and it's very valuable to their physical and psychological well-being. It helps us recharge our batteries. Why should we worry about the state of tranquility across the country in the first place? To sort of put us in the mood, here are some figures which give a flavor of some of the key growing issues affecting tranquility. Motor traffic in the UK has increased by 23% between 2000 and 2019. Demand for air passenger services has increased by 65% between 2007 and 2017. In 2016, only 22% of England was completely free of light pollution. This is something that we found out in our night blight report. And we're losing over 3,000 hectares of greenfield land to development every year, and it's increasing. Between 2013 and 2018, it's increased by 73%. I've also added a screenshot of our Beauty Still Betrayed report, which looked at development in AONBs in particular, and which found that the number of housing units being granted in AONBs has increased by 27% since 2017, but the number of hectares used for developments in AONBs has increased by 129% since 2017. So this shows us this is a particular issue in AONBs. Not only are there increasingly more housing developments, but also they consume more land, they're less dense. So lots to be worried about when it comes to tranquility, which is why it's even more important to protect it. I'll tell you a bit more about the tranquility mapping story, which started in the early 90s, when Simon Rendell of Ash Consulting first developed the idea of tranquility as a way of valuing the undisturbed countryside as a natural resource in its own right. CPRE and the Countryside Commission, now Natural England, adopted this idea, and we worked with Rendell to develop the first maps of tranquil areas. As Denise had mentioned, these were, as valuable as they were quite limited to the extent that they defined what was tranquil by the lack of infrastructure and their noise and visual intrusiveness. Tranquil areas were then considered to be those sufficiently far away from these negative factors. Based on this methodology, here's how tranquil areas in England have evolved over time. As you can see, it's quite visually telling. And it was quite groundbreaking at the time and very influential in getting tranquility on the political agenda. Subsequently, the government said it would include tranquility in its new measure of change in countryside quality in the 2000 Rural White Paper. And to make this actually happen, CPRE then worked with Natural England, CPRE and Natural England worked with Newcastle and Northumbria universities to develop a more sophisticated way of mapping tranquility across England. So this started with a case study in 2 areas of northeast England, Durham Coalfields and Northumberland National Park in 2004. And then the transferability of this method was tested with an extension project in the Chilterns AONB in 2005, before getting upscaled to a national level in 2006 and 2007. And Denise already mentioned some of them, but some of the key characteristics of this method and what made it more sophisticated than the original 90s mapping work include the fact that it followed a bottom-up approach through participatory consultation. There were close to 2,500 participants involved, when the original maps only had a sort of expert judgment approach. And this approach helped identify 44 factors influencing tranquility, but not just factors that would detract from tranquility, which was the sole focus of the 1990s map, but also positive factors. So those elements that help contribute to the feeling of tranquility. I'll talk about this in a little more detail later on. And then it also established the relative importance of each of these issues by giving them relative weights. And finally, it accounted for varying conditions. So depending on topography or vegetation, that might change what you see or what you hear. And it also accounted for cumulative effects of several factors in a given space, all things that the first generation of mapping work didn't do. These issues then had to be mapped. So they were associated with existing map-based datasets, so things like CH land cover or Earth elevation. And then different weights were added to these depending on their relative importance. And then all layers were combined to map the experience of tranquility in 500 by 500 meter grid squares. So that means that each square on the map had a different tranquility score based on the combination of multiple factors present and their relative weight. And then based on this, we could create these heat maps. Denise already shared the national one, and I'll share a more close-up version of them with you later on. I'm not going to dwell on this, but it's just so we have a slide with it. These were the top 8 survey responses when it comes to what tranquility is, so what contributes to tranquility, and then the top 8 survey responses when it comes to what disturbs tranquility. So as you see here, and as was mentioned before, seeing lots of people ranks high up on elements that disturb from tranquility. And then in a little more detail, here are some visually illustrated examples of positive factors in their relative attributed weight. So the way the weighing system works is essentially out of a total of 100, you can have up to 50% of the weight for positive factors and up to 50% of the weight for negative factors. But of course, this is relative weights. So on there, for example, seeing the sea might not look like a large amount, but it will depend on the calculation that is done for a given square. So if you have a lot of positive factors in a given square and not a lot of negative factors, these positive factors are going to account for a lot more than in another area, for example. And then same here, examples of negative factors and their relative attributed weight. The weighing process is essentially a bit like making a cake. The factors are the ingredients, and then the weighing process is about how much of each ingredient for a certain type of cake. I don't know if that helps, but so here's the map that Denise already shared. I'll show you a close-up version of the northeast of England. And so you can see these tranquil areas are the ones, as expected, closer to urban areas. And then even close up, we're zooming in on the Northumberland coast AONB. As you see, and obviously all of these this is just zooming in, so it's still relative to the rest of the country. It is quite tranquil in the Northumberland coast. I think that some of the most tranquil areas in there are Holy Island and Bottom Bay, and then I think some of the least tranquils are in the south. And as you can see, because we're zooming in, it's a bit more pixelated, so you can see each of the 1,000 square meter squares on there. So this mapping work and CPR's campaigning work as well did lead to some successful policy implications for tranquility. I'm not going to dwell on the first two. I'll focus on the third one, which is one of the key ones. In 2012, the new National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF, included tranquility. And this was quite a breakthrough for tranquility. The NPPF gives local authorities the power to identify and protect tranquil areas, as well as smaller local green spaces for their especially tranquil qualities. Especially for the local green spaces, this is, by the way, something that neighborhood planning forums can do as well in a neighborhood plan. And then a few years later, the National Planning Practice Guidance added a little more support to the interpretation of this rather vague policy by recognizing that human sounds are the source of noise rather than natural sounds, and also by recognizing the human experience of tranquil areas through the potential to enjoy a sense of peace and quiet, as well as a positive soundscape. So this inclusion of tranquility in national policy was in itself something worth celebrating, and we're very happy that it's in there. However, there are still quite a bit of issues that remain with this policy. First of all, it doesn't have a definition of tranquility, neither in the glossary of the NPPF nor in the guidance. I've added our own definition of tranquility here, just so you see that there is an existing one. There's also no reference to landscape and visual intrusion. I found it interesting that Denise mentioned how visual factors are often the ones most considered for tranquility, and yet the NPPF and its guidance only refer to soundscape and don't consider how visual factors are likely to affect tranquility. There's also no reference to how factors can contribute to tranquility or detract from it, which is sort of the core of our approach to tranquility. And there's also no agreed and defined methodology. So government still doesn't specify how tranquility is to be properly assessed. And last but definitely not least, tranquility is essentially still seen as subjective. And this is an issue because by extension, that means it's still not considered as a serious topic. And I mean, you might be able to say the same thing for things such as pain or the experience of heat. We all have a different experience of pain. It's not something that you can objectively assess, and yet it's not something that we consider as unimportant and not worth considering. Similarly, tranquility is just as important as pain. So where do we stand now? As mentioned just now, there's a lot of room for improvement when it comes to government recognition of tranquility and sort of the clarity of the concept in national policy. There's also a lot of room for improvement in terms of how many local authorities include tranquility in their local development framework. A few years back, we conducted a survey of local authorities to find out more about the application of tranquility in local plan policy and in designated landscapes since the introduction of the NPPF. And the results showed that while there was a high number of designated landscape areas with a tranquility policy in place, such as this AONB, less than 1 in 5 in other local authorities had one, and 3 out of 4 were not planning to develop one. In big part, they said that was because of a lack of definition in policy and planning guidance detail, but also because of a lack of evidence base available. And from our point of view, another challenge for local authorities also revolves around wider issues of the planning system and how it works, which is that essentially, well, the positive stuff is always optional. Authorities have the power to do it, they can do it, but they don't have to. And from our point of view, ideally, tranquility should be recognized as some things that local authorities should protect and recognize. And then this survey also showed quite a strong support for the development of new and updated tranquility maps. The last ones that at least we worked on date back from 2007, so they're already quite old. And this raises the question of whether and how to update and improve these maps as future areas of work. Denise already shared some really interesting insight into her own work, and I think it definitely covers the fact that if we were to improve this mapping work, there's definitely been big advances in technology, which now allow for a lot more detailed and accurate work. And there's also much more up-to-date data available, which could be used. There's also questions to be had on how the maps and the methodology behind them could be made more easily understandable to people. This notion of a tranquility score attributed to each square might not be the most accessible approach. Something else to consider is the difference between urban areas and rural areas. They work differently when it comes to tranquility, and this is not something that is currently reflected in our mapping work, and it should. It could, for example, include a different approach to the type of people that are part of the consultation, which is something that Denise already touched upon. And last, but also definitely not least, if any, from our point of view, any updated work on how to map tranquility should move away from a focus that only looks at how to protect tranquility, but also look into how to enhance tranquility. There has been a big shift in the last 4 to 5 years in the government approach as well. See the 25-year environment strategy, which says that it should not just be about protecting, but also enhancing nature. And this should be the case for tranquility as well. And this is the last slide, I promise. Here's a little graph that can sort of illustrate this idea. here we could have, say, the 10% most tranquil areas where it is most important to protect existing tranquility. So these would obviously include AONBs and national parks, but other places as well. And these places should have the biggest level of constraint because they have the biggest amount of existing environmental capital, so factors that contribute to tranquility, and the least amount of intrusion. But then we should also be looking at those 10%, which has the least tranquil areas. They have the most, the biggest level of intrusion and really not that much environmental capital, but that means that even the tiniest bit of improvement could have a big impact on the experience of tranquility in these areas. And examples of how to do that could be undergrounding power lines. I think we've done this at CPR in a few areas. We've secured money to do this with National Grid. You can also put roads underground and tunneled. For example, in Surrey, the A3 was put underground at Box Hill, and this had a massive impact on tranquility. And then when it comes to increasing this bit, so the amount of environmental capital, there's also a lot that can be done to restore nature and therefore increase the factors that benefit to tranquility, for example, through local recovery areas. And all of this, from our point of view, is something that ideally should also be reflected in the mapping work. Thank you very much. I'm done.
Thanks, Madeline. That was lovely. And it's good to know, isn't it, that all this work is out there. A lot of the research, a lot of the methods and systems are in place, which gives us a bit of hope, I think, as we move forward to exploring how the AONB can be made more tranquil, identify where it is tranquil, and enhance that tranquility. So thank you very much. And we're going to move on quickly. Over time, I'm afraid, but Dr. Georgie Soman, and Georgie is a locally based GP and Public Health England physical activity clinical champion for the northeast of England. Georgie has an interest in planetary health. She is also a co-founder of NHS Ocean, which aims to ensure that healthcare impact on the ocean, on oceanic health, is not forgotten. Georgie.
Thanks so much. Just checking that you can hear me and you can see my first slide, if that's okay. Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm going to start really with my friend, and he's actually got a terminal heart condition. He comes up from the south a few times a year to stay, and he has a really busy life, challenges of working from home, ever increasing to-do lists as a consequence of that, expectations and pressures. But when he comes, he says he feels worry-free. In connection with nature, he feels calm and it's really quiet. And then when he goes back to work again, he ends up saying that he feels refreshed, restored and rested. And so that's where I'm going to start my talk today. And I'm going to use this definition. And I think it's really interesting that we've just heard there about the importance of definition. But from a health point of view, I felt that this one tied in with the words that he was using in our interpretation of perhaps how we benefit in our own well-being. So I'm a GP and I have a role with what used to be Public Health England, and it's now called the Office of Health Improvement and Disparity. But I've also been working in the last few years in healthcare sustainability. So what this work has done is look at healthcare's role in the climate and nature emergency. And I'm thrilled to say that in spite of the pressures of COVID, Greener NHS was launched by Simon Stevens back in 2020, still during the crisis, reminding us that healthcare can be part of the problem, but also part of the solution. And it set out an ambitious roadmap to take the NHS to net zero. But I've also been interested in the other roadmap, or actually in Northumberland on our coast, I'm going to call it a path, that looks at healthcare and health's relationship with nature and biodiversity. And in particular, in relation to the nature and biodiversity of our coast and ocean, and the crucial work we can do to reduce healthcare's impacts whilst advocating for those benefits to health and well-being from healthy blue and green spaces. Because of course, nature, climate and health are all codependent. And it's this codependency on our natural systems that is now becoming a mainstream part of medical school training. And of course, we have been living in conjunction with nature and tranquility from nature for thousands of years. But it's only in the last 50 that this relationship has started to change so significantly, and that we've started to live outside those planetary boundaries on which we so depend. But where does tranquility sit within health? This is a really difficult question. And I think the first thing we need to do is define what we really mean by health now, because health can sometimes be interpreted as healthcare. So that's the doctor's appointments and the medicines that we might take, the interventions. But it's now understood that healthcare itself will contribute only on average around 10 to 20% of our healthy lifespans. So population health describes how health is far more than us waiting for patients to become unwell, and understands that clean air and water, good quality housing, fair employment and education, and access to good quality green and blue spaces will all, amongst many others, play hugely important roles. And I can honestly say that the concept of tranquility has never been mentioned as any part of any formal or even more recent training, even in healthcare sustainability. And this makes it difficult to interpret, but I'm going to think about it in the concept today of coastal population health. This is the CMO document, which was part of the report this year on the health of our coastal communities. And within it, we were able to see that amongst human health, there are wide varieties along that coastal stretch in the inequalities and fair access or equal access to health, to good health. And one of the infographics right at the end, which largely focuses as a document on human health, is this one, which looks at the interaction and that codependence between nature, between climate and between coastal communities. So where can we put tranquility within this? It's obviously, we've discussed today, incredibly important and crucial part of the conversations that we're to have if we're going to talk about planetary health and health. But if we think again of health in that concept of population health, we can find some links. We know, for instance, that noise pollution is a major and increasing threat to human health. The range of disease burden from noise pollution is estimated at 1.0 to 1.6 million disability adjusted life years. That's a way we can measure ill health in Europe from WHO data, World Health Organization data. And nature can act as a buffer to anthropogenic, that's human noise, and natural noises are found to buffer and improve the emotional perception that we have to noise pollution. And taking other interruptions on tranquility, for instance, air pollution or water pollution in the context of planetary health, we know that seagrasses, seaweeds, kelp and ocean nature, as well as, of course, terrestrial green space, can reduce many of the impacts of air and water pollution to our health. And more recently, especially after the impact of COVID, there's been significant interest in the healthcare benefits from spending time in nature from health, especially to mental health. This is the Dasgupta review that came out last year, which discussed how our economies, livelihood and well-being, that all-important term well-being and health, are dependent on our most precious asset, nature and biodiversity. So the government has rolled out 7 projects nationwide, which are collaborative approaches to what is described as green or nature-based prescribing. So just to explain, social prescribing understands the wider determinants of health that we mentioned before, and it looks at re-engaging our patients with what matters most to them. And that might be involving them back with community or helping with housing or fuel poverty, but it could also mean reconnecting our communities with nature. And how we then evaluate the benefits to nature, from nature to human health, is really important, talking today and hearing some of these stories, because if such schemes are to be upscaled or used as models of good practice, then it means we need to be doing this well. But it's really difficult to do when tranquility isn't really included in any of the conversations. And also because in healthcare, often we measure single treatments or medications and how they impact on single diseases. But in the concept of nature, there are no silos and everything tends to be connected. And increasingly, I think what might need to happen is that we have further conversations and narratives and start to understand and be able to define tranquility and its benefits better. And also in healthcare, one thing that's really important is the benefits of nature in our NHS estates, and we're doing a lot of work around this. The fantastic NHS forest, for instance, looks at the benefits of healing to patients, to staff and to visitors of a small amount of wild space on hospital grounds or GP practice grounds as well. How we measure that and evaluate that will also be really important in stressing to major stakeholders the need to start to invest in such assets. But thinking again through the concept of planetary health, which is how we're now learning and how we're now teaching the doctors of the future and the healthcare professionals of the future, we have to also take this the other way too, because these benefits to us need to also take into account and measure the possible impact on nature and climate, because our health depends on this too, locally and globally. So we also need to factor in that whilst we can benefit so greatly from tranquility, we can impact on it too. And this impact of us on our own pollution and noise on our coasts also could include our impact on water and air pollution, which can disrupt the tranquility and balance of complex food webs and habitats, and even in the ability of our ocean to absorb carbon dioxide and produce the air oxygen that we breathe. And again, all of this impacts not just on our health, but on our communities and those far from our own shores. Going back to healthcare and deeper into the ocean, the impact of noise pollution, for instance, from the many cargo ships that bring in 80% of the stuff that we use in healthcare, and we use a lot of stuff, can have impacts and consequences on marine life such as whales. It's been fascinating recently that a colleague and I have been able to work to collaborate with suppliers, shipping companies and healthcare to look at ways that we can encourage reducing speed and noise and advocate for biodiversity and nature, not just carbon metrics, to be part of frameworks on how we engage with suppliers too. But back to our coast. How can we, moving forwards, get this balance right? It may be that other ways of explaining the importance of nature could help stakeholders understand better how we can value these benefits that we obtain to health from the natural capital or ecosystem services. This is the tangled net diagram that one of my contacts from NHS Ocean has shared, which looks at so many of those complex interactions from benefits, harms and potential risks that we can have from interactions in oceans and coasts. And going back to one of the talks that we've just had, thinking about that concept of ecosystem service, it's really interesting that when we look through how the Office of National Statistics, for instance, puts a value on our marine natural capital or nature and the services that nature can give us, it's really hard to unpick in there health benefits from tranquility. And that maybe means that this word brings a lot of hope. Because maybe if we can start to look into this and use these words and narrative and conversations and definitions, that we can increase the value that we do give and our understanding of what this can mean, and we can start to explain more how important and crucial these habitats, ecosystems and nature is to us and to our health. So I'm going to finish there. With my friend who comes up, who loves the tranquility and the impact that has on his well-being and on his health. And thank you so much for having me today. It's been fantastic to be able to be part of this. And as always, medical talks finish with the conclusion that more research is needed. And it's most definitely the case here, but also many more voices are needed. And it would be fantastic if people have any ideas on how health can link in with these conversations better, that they can feed that back to me and I can hear everyone's voices. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgie. Fantastic photographs, I have to say, quite inspiring. Yeah, I'm sort of taken back to the idea of tranquility and the moments I've had standing on top of the dunes above Emplin Bay, or up on the Border Ridge, in the Cheviots, and people have shed tears of sort of happiness, relief, release. I'm not quite sure what really, but I've never seen that before in 10 years that I've been guiding people around Northumberland. So something about COVID, about lockdown, about tranquility, and giving the people the space to stand and stare. I think that's certainly been part of that, part of the process that has triggered that response. So thank you to all our speakers. Thank you to Denise, to Henna, to Madeline, and to Georgie. And I can open up for questions. And Sarah's looking after questions. Do we have anything coming back, Sarah, please?
Good afternoon. Lots of good comments. So Fiona Greenwald saying fascinating and hopeful work to Georgie, and to Henna's as well. Lots of good comments now, but no specific questions. Denise and Madeline are going to hook up and talk further about tranquility. So maybe open the floor, Patrick, to if people want to.
Yeah, I'm happy to open the floor, so you can put your hand up if you want to add something, please, and we'll have about 5 minutes of that. We haven't run too badly over time. It's 17:50, I see, so I'm quite pleased that that's the case. Any hands up? Anybody want to add anything, please? Monica, yes. Hello, Monica. You may need to put your microphone on. No, I was getting quite excited. We had somebody coming in for some comments. I'll try. No. Anybody else?
Sorry, can you? I've managed to turn my microphone on. Can I?
Got you now. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm saying this is all absolutely fabulous. I felt a bit of a lone voice in the wilderness for the last 6 months, because myself and other residents at Dunstanstead have been trying to fight a battle against a car park being put at Dunstanstead, which is arguably the most tranquil part of the northeast Northumberland coast. And it doesn't seem to relate to the experiences that we've actually had in trying to object to that car park. And I'm wondering, is this a change in your view?
In my view, or
AONB's view?
I think it adds to the argument, doesn't it, really, about tranquility, and that's an ongoing process.
I'm just saying that because you didn't object to the car park.
Yeah, I can't comment on Monica. I don't know enough about it, I'm afraid, but we can come back to you, I guess.
I think you do need to know about it, because it's really key to what you're talking about here. And if you don't implement what you're talking about, it's a bit of blah blah blah, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think we do know about the car park and the application and the process it's going through. And I personally I don't know where we are with that at the moment, so I can't really comment on this forum. But yeah, we did correspond, didn't we, earlier in the year? So I'm up to date with that. But yeah, yes, I can't say much more, I'm afraid, because I don't know the answer.
No, that's great. I'm just hoping for something more positive next time when the application comes in again. It's been withdrawn for the moment.
Okay. Okay. We'll keep. Well, the AONB team will keep a watching eye on that. Absolutely. Yeah. Fiona Greenwald, please. You have your hand up.
Hello. Hi. It's just a thought, really. I work for the Environmental Records Information Centre, where wildlife records are collated, and it was just it's for Georgie, really. I've often thought that people out recording wildlife and making observations is quite a sort of mindful activity. And I just wondered if that had come into any of your sort of research work, or thought about that angle, for well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. So nature-based prescribing, or the concept of it as it comes through and is emerging, is a really broad spectrum. And that key point with personal healthcare, person-centered healthcare is what matters most to patients. So we've just discussed about, whether tranquility is objective and subjective, or, how it can be looked at. So certainly for some people, how they will feel tranquil and how they will get the benefit from it will depend on how they most appreciate it in their own experiences and in their own setting. So for some people, it will be, for me, it's actually photography. That would be my most biggest ability to focus and to feel mine just absolutely in that moment and at that time. But that's part of the challenge, will be that how we perceive it and how we get the best benefit from it will be different for everybody, and that we have to ask what matters most to patients. And we have to, perhaps in healthcare, have a really good understanding of what's available locally. And that's one of the biggest challenges, is we know there are so many wonderful things that are happening, but we perhaps just don't even know what's out there. And that will be really important, linking up, but also then not overwhelming those incredible grassroots organisations. And it's about nature and us, not nature for us, 100%. Yeah, thank you.
Right, thanks.
Thanks, Georgie, and thanks, Fiona. Okay, I'm going to take one more, I think, and then we're going to wrap it up. So first on the list is Denise Hewlett. Hello, Denise, you want to put your microphone on?
Thanks, Patrick. It wasn't so much a question, it was also addressing Fiona's question in line with what Georgie said. So one of the other areas that we work in the team is researching health and well-being and trying to determine the pathways, so how nature might have some impact on somebody's health and well-being in support of social prescribing and green prescribing. And as Georgie said in her presentation, I couldn't agree more, it's an extremely complex area to determine. The one thing that everything points to is, yes, we know nature, be it a blue space, be it a green space, for some even a slightly brown, muddy, cloudy puddle space has some impact, some enhancement, and of course there's the other side of it, some detriment depending on the person, for being in a certain space. But trying to determine how that happens has become really, I'm sure Georgie would agree, the quest for the Holy Grail. We've been doing work with Australia to try and see if very quantifiably we can capture the microbiomes that sit in soil and correlate that somehow with the quality of a species, how many species. I notice Ian put about bugs and butterflies, how many species in an area might be correlated to certain microbiomes. But Fiona, unquestionably, I'm with Georgia every step of the way. Yes, nature's good for us, but concretely saying this situation, that is really, really challenging and not popular with politicians to fund, probably because it's so challenging. Actually, Georgie, I don't know what you think. Anyway, over and out. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Right, okay, it's 6 o'clock. We're half an hour over time. Thank you to everybody for your contributions. Thank you to everyone who's attended. Please do get in touch with the AONB team via the website if you have further questions and so on. And just leaves me to say thanks to the AONB team, thanks to our speakers, and I'll see you all soon, and I'll see you all perhaps in a real space in 2022. So thank you, and good night.
Thanks, Patrick.